Good evening. My name is Jennifer Kellyanes, and I'm the Interim Director for Wesleyan University Center for the Arts. Welcome to the final live event of this year's Navaratri Festival. It is my great privilege to be co-hosting tonight's event with Wesleyan Dance Department, and I am joined by my distinguished colleague Hari Krishnan, Chair of the Wesleyan Dance Department and Professor of Feminist, Gender, and Sexuality Studies.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's my pleasure to host a conversation this evening with Ananya Chatterjea of Ananya Dance Theatre. The Navaratri Festival is made possible by the generosity of the dance and music departments, as well as the Madhu Reddy family. Thank you to the staff at the Center for the Arts for helping produce this yearly event. In the spirit of broadening our perspective of Indian music, we dedicate this festival to the memory of Mr. S.P. Balasubramaniam, one of India's most celebrated singers, shattering world records for singing more than 40,000 songs in 16 different languages. SPB, as he's fondly referred to, was unmatched in his vocal range for Indian film throughout South Asia, spanning multiple popular classical genres of music. This dedication is a testimony to his unique musical ability to unite people in truly interconnected ways, transcending language, ethnicity, caste, class, and more. This kind of unification is greatly needed in 2020, especially during this very fractured time.
Before we start our evening, we want to acknowledge that at Wesleyan Center for the Arts and Dance Department, we believe that one of the roles of the arts is to make the invisibilized visible. We also believe that it is not the responsibility of those who have been made invisible to remind us that they are still here. Therefore, as committed allies, we wish to acknowledge the respective grounds on which our institution and our visiting artists are present tonight. Wesleyan is located on the traditional lands of the Wangan. In Minneapolis, Ananya is joining us from the unceded land of the Dakota Nation in Minnesota Makoche. We honor their lands, waterways, and ancestors, past, present, and future, and we recognize their continued existence and contributions to our society. We also recognize and acknowledge those who did not come to this land by choice. All who come here are welcome in this space today.
A few notes before we begin. Please feel free to put questions into the chat throughout the whole evening, and we will answer them towards the end. If you have technical issues, any technical issues, feel free to message the CFA event staff in the chat. Before I introduce Ananya, I'd like for us to see a brief video of one of her recent choreographic works. As a kind of visual representation of her vision, her movement sensibility, but most importantly, her politics. So let's see the video, and then I will do a grand introduction of Ananya. Ananya Chatterjea is a choreographer, a dancer, a thinker, and an educator who brings together contemporary dance, social justice, choreography, and a philosophy of hashtag Occupy Dance. She's artistic director of Ananya Dance Theatre, a Twin Cities-based professional dance company of BIPOC women, and femme artists. She's the co-founder of Sean Graham Institute of Performance and Social Studies. She's also professor of dance at the University of Minnesota. She's a recipient of a 2011 Guggenheim Choreography Fellowship, 2012 McKnight Choreography Fellowship, 2015 Stage Outstanding Dance Educator Award, 2016 Joyce Foundation Award, 2018 Urban Bush Women Choreographic Fellowship, and a 2019 Dance USA Artist Fellowship. She's quite the mover and shaker. Her second book, Heat and Authority in Contemporary Dance, South Choreographies, reframes understandings of contemporary dance from the perspective of choreographers from South communities. And this is being published this fall with Palgrave Macmillan. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend, cherished colleague, political kindred spirit, and fellow shit disturber, Ananya Chatterjea. Welcome, Ananya. Welcome.
Hari, it's so good to be in community and conversation with you. This is after a long, many years of friendship.
It's more than 25 years of friendship. This is very special. It's also testimony to being in solidarity, in spirit, in thought, in politics, consistently, and unconditional love, radical love. And we'll talk about that. So what I would like to start with is, before we talk about this overarching title of this presentation, Rethinking Navaratri, I thought we can do a little bit more biographical digging in terms of who you are as a dance artist. And could you tell us a little bit about your early dance training, and what was the hinge that led you to the kind of political activist work you do today?
Thank you, Hari. I want to say that the political work, the political nature of my choreography, the justice-oriented nature of my choreography really goes back to my growing up in Kolkata. So I trained in classical dance forms, but at the same time, I was working with choreographers like Shambhu Bhattacharjee and songwriter Himango Bishwas, who were part of IPTA, the Indian People's Theatre Association, with its long time history of anti-colonial resistance. They were also, people who held the incisive thinking of a left front. So while I was really aware of class struggles through my dance, I wasn't, the way in which gender was unraveling was always part of my consciousness, because I would leave my guru's studio, and outside in the bus stop, the women's groups were very active in resistance. So there would be resistances at the bus stop just across. So the idealized world of my guru and the beautiful Abhinaya choreographies and the harmonious love that I experienced inside classical repertoire, I would come outside, and this was a completely different view against the kind of gendered violence that was both domestic and state-sponsored. What I know now is, despite and what I caught hint of, but I had to explore, was that despite the left front government's strong statement about how class and caste they had really moved away from class and caste, things like the violation at Mori Jhampi still happened, right? So caste was still something that was really deeply embedded in the fiber of society. And those violences are something we have to undo. But I came into it because one of the things I keep thinking about is how in Kolkata, you could not avoid one thing. You would sit in the public transportation in bus, and you would be caught for hours in traffic jam because of, the protest, the morcha, that would always be blocking public streets. And I know that very often, this was like about party politics and posturing, but it was for sure a democratic articulation of people's thoughts,
Yeah.
So this was just important, but I felt a difference. I felt the sharp contrast between what I saw on the streets in terms of women's street theater and in the street theater created by brilliant practitioners like Badul Sharkar and others. That and Hemangula's songs about Shankochil, the anti-imperial protest against the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, calling for a global sort of protest against such violence, that was in sharp contrast to the beauty of the classical dance repertoire. And both were in my body, sort of tearing my psyche apart.
So let's unpeel that a little bit more. So this alludes to a word I frequently use in my own work, rupture. So this kind of dissonance you felt between learning Odissi classical, neoclassical dance style with your esteemed teacher, Sanjukta Panigrahi, coupled with your own socio-political awareness of your community and larger context of who you are as a human being within the Indian nation. How did that sort of, could you talk about some of the challenges and some of the threads you saw that led to the kind of ferocious and fierceness in the movement sensibility which you so embody? And an example of that is what we just witnessed in your video. It's a combination of rage, fire, hope, and transformation, and solidarity.
Yeah. So, in one way, some of the passion that I dance with and I bring to my dance, I actually absolutely saw Sanjanani perform with. She danced with passion. And I learned that from her. It's the bending of where the passion goes in which I have extended what I learned, right? She also did say that dance or art needs to be a force of good in the world. However, I struggle very much with idealization. Like I would always think when we would dance Dashavatar or, where is Kalki really? What is the evil overflowing the world? What is going to move us towards justice? And all these times, all these imaginations, why are they so embedded in gendered and caste hierarchies, right? So the mythology itself, I wanted to open up and see what is. It bothered me that the mythological, the God that saves us is always gendered and caste and class located in particular ways. When in real life, we know it's not the case, right? People who have moved us forward, often from the deepest, most marginalized communities, take on, their protest against injustice often moves the entire society forward. That is just the truth. So I felt like sometimes the repertoire was difficult. When I would perform stories, or I would see even Nani performing the story of Draupadi. Where is the Krishna for extending the saris endlessly for all the women that I see? Where is Manisha Valmiki's? Who is extending her sari endlessly? Who? So I feel like these questions bother me. So we have to take responsibility for the repertoire that we dance, right? And it made me really, I think that the fact that we keep on not having answers to that, and we keep on dancing as if everything is okay, that continues to bother me and is at the root of my fury.
Right. So this thing about dancing in bliss and ignorance simultaneously, in addition to showcasing that bliss and showcasing the bliss and ignorance under over a veneer of activism and politics, it's something that continues to bother me when I see South Asian dancers jumping on this activist bandwagon. And I want to also sound you out in terms of the difference between a choreographer making political work versus an activist making dance work, choreography. They're two different things. Sometimes you can have intersectionalities, of course, like with most things in life. There are similarities, but my problem is the idea of novelty, using activism as a novelty to create some kind of newness and way to give yourself a new life in terms of this, your reshaping your identity as an Indian classical progressive dancer. And I have issues with that, because that is predominantly a kind of omnipresent problem, I feel, whether you are in this country or whether you're in India or anywhere else in the world. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, because you and I have had umpteen conversations about this, but if you can just articulate some of your ideas, that will be appreciated.
Yeah, I want to actually say that I do consider myself an organizer and a social justice choreographer, because I do believe that dance is both part of direct action, and there are moments when you have to recognize the social choreography and participate in the social choreography of protests, of being in the streets and understanding that energy. So I do both. And Hari, I want to make a distinction between making political dance and social justice choreography. So you can make a political dance in your, by yourself in isolation. You can make it, you can present this polished dance work to audiences in, let's say, a very prestigious venue, and that can be important and have its important impact. I'm more interested, I do social justice choreography, where I feel the investigation has to permeate every part of the process. For me, I actually learned to choreograph because of my commitment to social justice. What does it mean to stand with, to choreograph this idea of solidarity? What does it mean to learn from the energetic arcs experienced in the street during protest and bring that onto the stage so you can expand it, amplify it out to many different publics, right? I learned that because of my work inside organizing. I learned because of the skepticism of organizers that I began collaborating with early on. And they were like, so what are you going to do that's going to change something? So there are many ways in which I feel I learned to choreograph. Lighting design, for instance, is a big thing, right? It's difficult for lighting design to accommodate for a range of skin tones. When you're working with a company, a BIPOC company, skin tones differ a lot, right? So when lighting design needs to catch up to that. So there's a whole set of issues, how to foreground how to create a real mosaic and intersection of different stories, how to see how moments where we move away from each other and moments when we yearn together towards each other. These are all urgent things that I learned. I learned to choreograph because of my commitment to social justice. I am impatient with, as you say, the grand speak that comes in, and the idea of, innovating by bringing a political theme into choreography is insulting, because it's not the political theme into choreography that actually is important. It has to come from your life experience. The community, you owe it. We all owe it to the communities, so that we don't end up with the terrible savior complex that Teju Cole speaks so beautifully about. He reminds us that the savior complex is about having a big emotional experience for the person doing the saving. It doesn't really allow us to think constellationally, which is what we need to do.
True. This also in addition to what you said, the rigor in which you ideate movement, the rigor in which you and your dancers tear up that stage, also is an extension of protesting on the street. So there is a complete connection between what you're doing on the street protesting and how you choose to either abstract that, replicate that, and reimagine resistance and protest on that proscenium stage with the equal or if not increased amount of resistance and fury.
Also, what does it mean to stand with each other? What does it mean to say, I've got your back on the street, so I'll notice when the the smoke bombs are coming and when rubber pellets are being thrown, I'm going to watch for you so we can move away from each other. When you have that experience, you find that chemistry on stage. It's not something you can easily manufacture, right? So when you have traveled a long road and a multiple kind of road with people, you actually find that with each other. And I think that kind of way of building community, that how we are with each other in life shows up how we are with each other on stage.
Great. Excellent. So this ways of experiencing a kind of communal oppression as a community and resisting that through dance also makes me wonder about your way of working as a choreographer and the ways in which you approach collaboration, because you work with mass on stage. So when you are making dance, who makes the choreographic choices, and is it a kind of democratic flattening of kinesthetics, or do you create the movement? Does the incubation and the birthing of the movement come from you, from your body?
It does come from me.
Mm.
But I am really, really so privileged to work with the amazing artists I work with. So they will often be like, that's not going to be clean. Do it like this. And they're right? So I think that comes, Hari, out of the relationship of trust that we've built together as well. So I absolutely am in collaboration with my artists, but I create the choreography and the sort of network. But I am absolutely open to, by network, I mean the way in which the different pieces fit together, right? And I'm absolutely open to the ways in which they suggest and help me shift things. I do make the decisions, yes.
So you're saying that in terms of the nuances and the actual crafting of the final picture to add the hues, tints, and colors is a collaborative venture, collaborative decision-making process.
Also, because I am inside the work, I often work with directors with whom I've built long-term relationships. And then I work with fabulous composers as well, who will, who sometimes, it's like a back and forth, right? I create the choreography, they create a score, I respond, and then they shift, and then I shift a little bit. So that kind of, together stepping, which is sometimes a little bit forward, a little bit back, but we end up together. That's the process.
Great. I've seen your work over the years, 25 years to be exact. And you had worked with, but you've always been consistent about working with a sisterhood, a community of women. Recently, for the past couple of years, you have worked with a male-identified dancers. Could you talk about that shift?
Yeah. So, as I taught technique, I'll name Orlando Hunter came up to me and said, so when can men be in your work? I was like, I suppose it's now, because the truth is, who shows up for the work is the person doing the work. But also, I will say that most of the male presenting artists I work with also identify in femme ways. So they are really, everyone does have to identify in a femme way to work in that space because of the way in which we, break down the gendered hierarchies that are raining down on us from society. So Orlando opened the door, and there are other people who have come in.
Great. So this also speaks to larger ways of queering queering the dancing body, queering technique, in your case, queering Odyssey. And when we have worked together on our collaboration in 2004 Difference Desire, one of the markers in terms of our creative process was a conscious sublimating of gender and the kind of and the kind of androgyny which was really respectful, thoughtful, and powerful, right? So I'm really interested in terms of we live in such a misogynistic culture, whether in South Asia or whether currently in this country. And this kind of misogyny, this kind of patriarchy is sort of emboldened with a kind of religious fervor. So what I'm doing now with this, the next set of questions, is to dovetail into ideas of religious fundamentalism, and how that is a problem in terms of a kind of organic queer representation in choreography and movement. So I'd love your thoughts in terms of being a contemporary Indian dancer, and how do you see working within this really regressive power structures? Whether we are because you are born in India, I'm not. I'm born in Singapore. So I have a slightly different context in terms of what it means to be South Asian and what it means to be diasporic. So I'd love to have some of your thoughts about that in terms of nationhood, fundamentalism, and this queer representation of art.
I will say that one of my favorite things to choreograph, and something I'm very good at, and something that COVID has taken away from me, is femme intimacy. I've done, I really am interested in the ways bodies and limbs intersect and create different kinds of lines. And I like to do that as I deflect gaze. So for me, how can I choreograph and I'm not interested in couply dances, right? I'm interested in trios. I do duets, but I do a lot of trios, where I'm really investigating this idea of intimacy, even as I say that these people are empowered, and so we will speak back to you even from the middle of that intimacy. This is important. So we don't just say, oh, look, oh God, this is so beautiful. These limbs intertwine. Yes, great. Their limbs do intertwine and create shapes and sort of moving images where the limits of our bodies are made porous, right? So we can really find, so we can really you begin to wonder whose leg it is around whose waist. That is important. That is important when it is coupled with the idea of looking back and making sure that you see us in our terms. And at moments when we turn away and look only at each other, that's also important.
Right.
I don't know what to say about nationhood, except nationhood is just, it's toxic, right? It is toxic. So I'm never interested in religion. I am interested in spirituality, and I want to think about the ways in which spirit is both personalized and allows us to find ourselves in the moment that we aspire within dancing for something that can reach forward, that energetic reaching. To me, that is the moment that I transcend or sort of allow myself to become bigger than just myself, So I'm not just thinking of, oh, did I finish this line? But is this line, am I encompassing love for many of my people, my sisters, my community, as I reach my arms?
Right.
And I did want to say
please.
one thing. It is important to me. I am a contemporary choreographer. The company is BIPOC women with an X and femmes. And currently, right now, there is just one South Asian dancer. I take tremendous pride in both the fact that my dance is entirely contemporary from a South Asian base, right? So Odissi, yoga, and Chow, but also that, the artists who are holding this form are not South Asian. One of the first artists who is teaching this form, Yorcha, as I call it, outside, is Professor Alessandra Williams, who is a tenure track professor at Rutgers University, and she's African American, and she's the first person to teach it outside. I take that as a great pride, not in this sort of, expansionist way, but as who can stand up for Yocha, who can stand up for the footwork in Odissi. This is important,
Yeah, and also makes me think about, so 4 thoughts, I think 4. This idea of choreographing intimacy, I think it's really important also to, during the process of intimacy, as a Bharatanatyam dancer myself, who does a particular alternate response to the normative ways of looking at Bharatanatyam, mostly stemming from my interest in with my courtesan dance teachers. So doing a courtesan inspired representation of Bharatanatyam, which privileges eroticism, sexuality, and sensuality, and unabashed apology of the it is very unapologetic in terms of beauty and ugliness, right? In terms of how we acknowledge those ideas and not looking at beauty and ugliness as 2 polar opposites, but part of an enmeshed, complex entity. So I'm thinking about also, in terms of choreographing intimacy with 2 bodies coming together, I'm also thinking about histories, critical dance histories, alternate histories coming together also. And I think it's important as South Asian dancers is to allow alternate spaces, is to create a much more openness, empathy, generosity, compassionate ways of looking at Indian dance, a form which both of us love mutually, and not looking at the world of Indian dance through a kind of monolithic, regressive, dangerous lens. One needs to constantly interrogate and explode and rupture that lens, because only if that happens, there can be space created of marginalized communities, the kind of voices that are not on the mainstream, or not being voiced in terms of normative ways of looking at Indian classical dance. So my question is about, there is a lot of conversation about South Asian activists, about Black Lives Matter, and about caste and Black Lives Matter. How do you, Ananya, conceptualize this relationship between race-based oppression and caste-based oppressions? Because they're 2 different things. And they can have some similar threads, but you're dealing with 2 different issues. So I'd love for you to articulate some of your thoughts about that.
Thank you. So I want to hold up all the amazing Black and Indigenous feminists from whom I learned and came into claiming transnational feminism, which is the base of my work. And what they taught me was how to have this moment of foreground, this sort of strategic foregrounding of what we need to foreground at what point. This is a really important way to build solidarity, right? Having said that, so you talked about the resonance between Black Lives Matter and Dalit Lives Matter.
Basically, yeah.
So I think these are, yes, race and caste function differently, but the fact that we are discussing it is super important, right? So Isabel Wilkerson gives us an important perspective. Colored cosmopolitanism, Nico Slade gives us another perspective. There are really many different ways in which we need to think about. Maybe there are different categories of identification and they function differently, but the horror at the end of it is it astounds me how they sometimes come together, right? The horror of police brutality at the end, at the receiving end of it. So my question, I suppose, is how can we, and to people, and when we choreograph about, we think if we can, it's important when we choreograph and show up for Black Lives Matter, how can we at the same time turn our eyes inside? I feel like, I hope that the Dalit Lives Matter movement is held up with as much power as the Black Lives Matter movement. We're discussing it across the world right now. But I wonder how they can energetically find symbiosis. Then we can begin to unravel them and understand the different ways, the epistemology and ontology, the differences of those. Yeah, they both function as a kind of assemblage of violences.
But the criteria, the kind of passionate empathy one generates for a BLM issue, I'm talking in terms of South Asian dance specifically, and after embracing that issue in such emphatic ways, going back to a kind of caste-based representation of Indian classical dance practice. Do you see a problem there? Do you see that's where the rub is?
Exactly. That's exactly my problem. I feel like it's great. We can point our fingers at, we can really sort of say, oh, that's terrible that happened, down with white supremacy, but we are part of that same kind of supremacist behavior unless we actively work to dismantle caste. And we all have to be part of it, because what is happening is it has been happening for generations, but it's gathering so much energy right now. How can we hold up the work of Equality Labs and Mozi Soundarajan and many other brilliant activists who are really showing us the way? And to me, what they are doing, the way they have reimagined, the way of coming together, the way they're, Equality Labs held this conversation with, so many communities across, from India, from Pakistan, Dr. Cornel West, all of them together. To me, that is what innovation feels like. That is what transnationalism really feels like. They're holding up models. So can we support them? Can we, for once, take the backstep, step back, and push that forward?
Great. And I think when you think about this, a larger topic of our conversation, rethinking Navaratri, also rethinking ways of looking at not being selective and exhibiting selective dementia, and sorry, not dementia, but selective amnesia.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to recognize that and to make sure that there's a kind of democratic application in one's politics.
Yeah,
exactly. And not being and not cherry picking what one wants to do politically for that day, and not allowing oneself to be the flame, and not allowing oneself to have that particular politic as a kind of flavor for the month, because that's absolutely offensive.
It is. And I am I talked to you about the amazing Black feminists who taught me many important lessons. I learned from the brilliant feminist June Jordan, who said, freedom is indivisible. So this notion of freedom, if you divide it in different parts, and you're for the freedom of these people, but not for the freedom of these people, you failed the definition of freedom. So how are you going to choreograph liberation if you are going to partition it? It's not going to be liberation.
And how do you distribute your empathy, with equity and conscience, and not compartmentalizing one's empathetic distribution and generosity? I like to also talk a little bit about the idea of your upbringing in Kolkata, in terms of what the idea of Navaratri means to you, and the kind of popular representation of Navaratri we have today. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because you have a slightly different take because of your proximity to a particular goddess.
So here's the thing, Hari. Yes, So I didn't grow up with Navaratri as it's celebrated. I grew up with Durga Puja. And, there's this notion of Durga coming home with her family and, was very much really it was kind of anthropomorphized, but it was really the story of middle-class Bengali women coming home. When the story is Durga descends from, her like abode in the Himalayas with Shiva and comes with her kids and comes to all of us and we celebrate her. So it was very much, there was this there's layers to it. So there's that notion of the story of the, Bengali woman who comes home. There is the notion of Durga, the feminine power, which is celebrated. We celebrate this amazing tantric sort of feminine power, but and of course she kills the Mahishasur, which is where the problem lies. She kills Mahishasur because no male god can do it. So she has to be reimagined, she has to be created, and so there is all of the stories of goddess power come with brackets around them. So there's one thing is that, okay, so she is put together by all these different gods giving parts of themselves to her. There's one problem. The much bigger problem is how Mahishasur is imagined. Mahishasur is imagined, and there is a particular, it's completely casteist terms. So the demon, Mahishasur, who is the demon, she's supposed to be known as Mahishasur Mardini, the slayer of this particular demon. That story has completely fallen apart. And there is a Dalit community, the Asuras, and they've been talking about their how they feel about this as well. So I feel like it is so embedded, this different kinds of gender and casteist violence are so embedded in these imaginations. I think there are some amazing things in it, in the way in which the spirit of Durga, when the spirit of Durga is present, due to all of our invitations, the flames start to dance. I love that part, but I really can't take on this particular representation of Durga when it is embedded in casteist violence, can I? So I think we have to really think about how sometimes mythology tricks us into accepting some kinds of imaginations that are really powerful and strong, but also feeds us subliminally or very clearly, other kinds of violences.
Yeah, I think part of that reimagination is also recontextualizing and personalizing these heteronormative ways and really subverting it for yourself and in terms of your own politics. And what do you do with that information? It's not just subverting it, but what do you do with that information? How does that information become a kind of dailiness of practice?
Yes, and also how, I feel like we have to, my mentor, Brenda Dixon Gottschalk, right, talks about the Africanisms inside American ballet. And she talks about how, Picasso's work, Cubism, is so influenced by looking at these amazing sculptures from West Africa. And then she talks about the story about how an early student told her, "Don't take away my Picasso." I think we are in one of those moments, don't take away the Devis, the goddesses that I like so much. Well, I think if you want to hold on to the notion of femme power, you're going to have to recreate it, reimagine it, and rematerialize it for you in different ways, which does not simultaneously push down others.
Right, and part of that reimagination and it's rethinking is also part of your next book in terms of contemporary dance and how one takes away contemporary dance from the clutches of a kind of Eurocentric, time-tested history, and how do you break that down? and to create new ways and new thoughtful, compassionate, more progressive ways of looking at contemporary dance. But that's going to be a part 2 talk, because Ananya is coming back with a company to a Wesleyan, hopefully in the spring, if not in the fall, depending on the COVID situation. But I'd like to now take a segue in terms of answering some questions from the audience. I understand we have some questions.
Hari, can I take a minute to quickly
You can
show a video of that is, so we went out this summer, we went out into the public parks to rehearse, and just after the necessary pause of the George Floyd murder, and then we saw the affordable housing crisis burst open in our public parks. So we were rehearsing next to all of these kinds. We're in the vicinity of the protests for George Floyd and in the shelters that had been set up in our public parks. So I want to have there's a quick video of that.
Sure. Could we play a video, please? Great. It almost reminds me of your sound design itself. It's a combination of a kind of there is urgency, and there is also a kind of call to new worlds, new ways of looking at the world, and new ways of being. And the spoken Odissi drum syllables reminds me of Ananya's heartbeat in terms of constantly pumping with that kind of core of who you are in essence. So I'm going to read some questions. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. If we have 9 minutes, so I'm going to ask that if we can be brief but substantive, but let's see what happens. Can the spirit connect you beyond your body to others and commune beyond people into broader realm of beings?
It is my hope, right? Because we are trying to constantly reach out to audiences to provoke questions and their thoughts. Um, I hope that that spirit is also energy, right? It's also energy that you drum up from the depths of your stomach to reach out to communities and audiences and various publics.
How has hashtag Dalit Lives Matter been received in India?
So Dalit Lives Matter is a movement has its roots in India. Absolutely. It's also, so we are, as diasporic communities, we bring ourselves fully. So there's amazing activists that are working there in India. It's not just here. So how it's being received. Well, any resistance to fascist violence will be received with not so good. And there's some kinds of fake representations sometimes, by which I mean people who are brought in to stand up for the government. But all skin folk is not kinfolk. We already know this. In many cases. So this is also the case there. However, I think that the government recognizes what a force, what amazing leaders, Dalit leaders, are coming forward. So hopefully they're taking note, because it will shift. It will shift. It will shift India as we know it.
I also must mention that Dalit oppression and the upper caste-based hegemony is also very much rampant in the diaspora, including the U.S. also. So very much pervades our entire reality. And I think the work in terms of caste and class, oppression and resistance, and how we negotiate these ideas and these politics is very much pervasive in terms of not only our daily lived life experiences, but also in terms of our artistic practice, particularly those who are South Asian dancers. Caste, you cannot do Indian classical dance without a kind of wearing blinders that caste does not exist. It's very much imbricated in the history, in the representation, and in the politics.
And I want to just quickly hold up something. This work that I'm making, which is that rolling down the hill. We imagined it as a tribute to those who die with only the stars as their witness. And the entire work features, as you know, which has great relevance for both Dalit and Black lives and those deeply marginalized peoples in our communities, right? And it features spells that are written by the brilliant Sharon Bridgeford, and also a lot of work, vocal and performative work by this amazing artist from New Orleans, Spirit McIntyre.
Thank you, Ananya. What does it mean or look like to both work within a tradition or a form? Thank you for putting that in quotes. It's greatly appreciated, while critiquing the power structures that created it. How, if it at all, does one choreograph a critique? It's one of our pet things to talk about, and because it's our shtick, it's what we do as dance makers, you and I, Ananya. I'd like you to share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that sometimes I'm all about strategy. And strategy needs a lot of approaches, a multi-pronged approach. Sometimes I love thinking like a worm, what's that worm? Uipoka, we say in Bengali. I forget that worm. That particular creature that eats its way all from inside. And when you look at it, it's there. And then you go to touch it, boom, it all.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
What is it? Termite. So, I think there is great power in working from the inside and eating things away. I work inside a big institution of higher education. I hope to think that I am inviting in students to think about liberation and radical politics in a very different way. So that is one way of eating from inside. And another way is from outside. So there's multiple ways to work. And I think that question about working inside tradition and form, I feel like you have to, the moment you take away parts of tradition, what passes as tradition, by the way, or parts of things that are obviously violent and riddled with age-old hierarchies, you actually dismantle that thing called tradition immediately. You rewrite it already. That itself is a challenge to many people. You can also make that power that is encoded inside tradition irrelevant by doing that. So I wanna say that we use it's like it's like the color orange. Do we have to give up the color orange because the fundamentalists grabbed it, or do we have to take it back and completely use it in very different ways?
I think also part of that, part of what you just described is also realizing that you don't, the problem happens is when you relegate words like tradition and classical to some kind of nostalgia and some kind of reimagine ways of looking at the world and dismissing contemporaneity and dismissing a whole social modern history and really relegating those words with antiquity, because that was part of the rebuilding and the reimagination of the nation in the early part of the 20th century. So one has to be really recognize that and really work hard at dismantling those cobwebs and those old outdated tropes.
Also, Hari, this nationalism thing also dovetailed with the early multiculturalism, where I think certain people had to hold, Black and brown artists specifically had to hold this thing called tradition, so that the whiteness at center could move forward and become and represent the most cutting edge and sharpest avant-garde movements in dance or other art forms.
And also realizing the slippery slope between cultural heritage, cultural nationalism, and critical reflexivity. So I think these are really important ways of creating new roadmaps and new progressive ways of thinking and being. I'll be completely remiss if I do not give a shout out to my amazing dance department and my colleagues, because the mandate of our dance department, and you will appreciate this, is contemporary dance from global perspectives. So part of that pedagogical activity we do is the idea of rupturing the artist-scholar binary. So I'd like you to talk about in terms of your work, because I am exactly in the same way in terms of how do we sublimate this kind of high theory and really rigorous art practice, and how do we sublimate that in really complex ways, because the potential to embody this kind of dual partnership between an artist and a scholar is possible and is also necessary in this complex age today. So could you talk a little bit about that quickly? We are 8 o'clock, but anyways, large question. But I think we have many dance majors and some students who will be interested in this.
So I love the world of ideas, and like you, I love to think through ideas and materialize them in embodied ways. I think it's really important to make a distinction between that kind of interest in ideas, which, we don't have to be just relegated to be dancers. We can think and dance at the same time, which we do, And I think it's urgent because dance embodied this kind of embodied knowledge production. We are producing knowledge, ways of being with each other. We we actually have amazing skills in sharing space, rhythm, and time, and listening to each other, understanding where our different bodies are going to go. So if I'm dancing close to you, I'm going to still dance with you without hitting you. There's amazing ways in which we know how to be with each other through dance. So, and beyond that, there are many other ways in which dance produces knowledge. So dance has a great investment in ideas as well. One idea being liberation. Anyway, so I think that as artists, as dancers, we have great, we claim our power when we say we can do both. At the same time, for me, it's one feeds the other. They're not separate at all. And, just as I finished my book, I took such great pleasure in writing about these choreographers who I love, contemporary choreographers that I love from the global South and multiple Souths. And I wrote about it with great love because I understood from an embodied perspective what it is. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to privilege that knowledge. However, I think that high theory, like high technique, can sometimes be used to delegitimize different ways of entering dance. And I'm not about that. I'm about how we love ideas.
Yeah. And also part of this whole rethinking Navaratri is also taking it away from the clutches of elitism, privilege, and entitlement. So it's this idea. I always tell some of my students, I love to live in the world of process. This world of a process, and really invested in this constellation of ideas and discourse and discussion. And what comes out of that, then the destination doesn't matter. Because the journey, the process has been such a rich and golden experience. And that for me is accomplishment.
Yes. Yes.
I would like to thank you, Ananya, once again for such a thoughtful, productive, delightful conversation. It's two friends, it's two comrades, it's two, I shouldn't say comrades now in this age, but the idea of kindred spirits and moving, thinking, being, experiencing, and resisting in solidarity. And I always wish for that to continue. Thank you, and thank you, dear audience, for being part of this conversation. Have a good night.
In the words of Dr. Cornel West, in Radical Love, seeing the world from the perspective of the most oppressed. With you, my brother.
Radical love, and let's continue making good trouble. Thank you.